Greetings viewers, your friendly neighborhood Eric the Car Guy here, and thank you very much for tuning in today. And I'm excited for you because I'm going to show you how to install a transmission cooler on a vehicle today. Now specifically I'll be working on a 2003 Honda Pilot, but the information I'm going to show you here will apply to pretty much any vehicle that you want to install an external automatic transmission cooler to. I should probably specify that because this is for automatic transmissions. Now why would you want to install a transmission cooler? Well, if you're going to be towing with your vehicle, that heats up the automatic transmission quite a bit, and adding an external cooler can really extend the life of your automatic transmission if you're going to be towing. So the information in this video pertains to you. Otherwise, you just watch it because, well, my videos are cool and they're fun to watch. Now let's start things off with what not to do. And that's what I found on this Pilot when I first brought it in. Somebody had already installed a transmission cooler on this vehicle, but, well, they zip tied it to the power steering line and it was rubbing up against the condenser on the front. You don't want to loosely install a power steering cooler like this because, well, this could have damaged the condenser. Now I checked it and the condenser isn't leaking, but if it would have continued like this, well, it might have damaged that condenser. So keep that in mind as you work. Now I'm going to show you a better way to install a transmission cooler. Let's get started. This is the transmission cooler that Go Powertrain sent me with the remanufactured transmission. This is the paperwork that came along with that. And note what it says right here. Your warranty depends on your adherence to these guidelines. Now normally what I would do in hooking up an external transmission cooler is I would go from the out of the transmission into the radiator transmission cooler, through the radiator transmission cooler, then out to the external cooler, and then back to the transmission for maximum cooling. This says otherwise. They only want you to use this new transmission cooler with this transmission. I'm going to follow those guidelines so that I keep my warranty. But you might consider doing it a different way if your transmission or warranty company does not require this, if you were going to add a transmission cooler. Anyway, let's get this out of the box and see how it fits in the front of the engine, in front of the vehicle. This cooler, which I'm sure Go Powertrain did not make, comes with these attachments that allow you to attach it through a radiator. Now this can be done and it's okay, but see, I don't like these for this very reason, because when you use this, the cooler is literally smashed right up against what's behind it. And that decreases its efficiency because whatever heat is in this condenser, which that's what this is for, can bleed into the new cooler. So you don't want that. You want some space, kind of like what they did with the power steering cooler here, in between the components for better cooling efficiency. They were kind enough to provide me with some brackets and hardware though to position this where I needed it to. So I don't have to use these. They gave me options, so I will give them that. We're now inside the engine compartment where the engine normally lives. This is the driver's side, this is the passenger side. This is the main cooling fan, this is the condenser fan, which helps your AC work better. Whenever you position a cooler like this and you have electric fans, position it in front of the cooling fan. This way, when you're sitting in traffic at idle, it will draw air through the cooler. If you put it in front of the condenser fan, that may not necessarily happen. So you want to make sure that you put it in front of the cooling fan when you can. Now the lines coming from the transmission are going to come through this area here and over here. The cooling fan is behind this. I don't know if I can get this in behind there. If nothing else, take the power steering cooler loose. I think I'll do that. A couple of 10 millimeters. In a perfect world, I'd want it right about here. That power steering fluid cooler is going to make it so that this is right up against there. So there's really very little room in front of the condenser if I do that. But it's looking more and more that it's going to be something like this. And another thing about these coolers, I believe you can mount them like this, and even like this. But I don't think you're supposed to mount them with the inlet and outlet on top like this. I think my bumper stuff turned out really well. The reason why I have it on here now is to gauge how much room I have for this cooler, which honestly, let me get a light for you. I have plenty of room up in there in front of this power steering cooler and everything. It's going to be placed a little farther away than they recommend, but I think it'll be fine, especially if I get it in the airflow. And what I mean when I say that is, I don't necessarily want to place it where the bulk of the cooler is here. I want to place it like perhaps down here so it gets good airflow, or maybe even up high. Well, actually you see this little narrow spot here? It almost looks better to place it down lower in this area so that it gets good airflow. So I'll probably mount it down here, but the way I'm going to do this I could pretty much put it wherever I want. But I just remembered something. I also plan to put an intercooler down here for the supercharger, so I got to leave room for that. And there might be just enough room underneath this bumper to do that. So I'm going to try to remain above this bumper, and I believe that should get sufficient airflow. I use this exact same method to mount the cooler on the Fairmont, and I use this, I think it's 1 inch wide. Yeah, it's 1 inch wide steel that I got from the hardware store. It's not super strong, but for my purposes, I think it's going to work great. And the idea is I'm going to come up in here with some of these strips, and I'm going to mount them, 2 of them, here and here, so that I can mount the cooler to that. First step, I'm going to take it over to the vise, and I'm going to put a 90-degree bend on this end. That way I can get it positioned where I want it up in here and cut it to length. This has a rough edge. I'm going to smooth that out first. I'm just going to do that with a roll-lock disc. I'm going to take this, just put it in the vise about the thickness of the jaws. But I'm going to take my square, lay it up against it, and make sure that it is square before I tighten the vise down. And here's where the magic happens. Start bending, but I'm going to hit it with a hammer so I can get it down to a 90-degree angle. Now I have that. Because I'm lazy and measuring takes time, I'm going to set this down where it's going to mount down on the bottom here. I'm just going to mark where it comes into contact with this upper support. I'm actually hoping to go up inside of it a little bit, so I'll just go right about there's where I'll cut it. I'm going to take that same square, got it in the vise, just going to find where my mark is, make a nice straight line. And I've got it mounted in the vise where it's close here. I don't want to be cutting way out here because it starts to get wobbly, but right here it's a little nice and snug. Safety glasses. Notice how I sort of scribed the line first and then I started cutting down into it. That helps guide the blade and hopefully it'll give you a nice straight edge. But I'm gonna do the same thing I did when I started with this cut and smooth it out a little bit. You can use a file for this too. Perfect. And I can even angle this out this way a little bit. It's okay if it's angled like that to keep it away from this power steering cooler. Because this will move around a little bit like this, like a little bit. The cooler, when it's mounted, will give it some rigidity and strength, but it will move like this. And the last thing I want is for it to start to come in contact with the power steering cooler and maybe rub through it and cause a leak. So I want to be mindful of parts that can touch each other because everything in a vehicle vibrates, especially one that may see off-road duty. So you want to make sure that you got plenty of clearance and space between things. And the rule of thumb is about the width of a zip tie. If you can take the width of a regular zip tie and fit it in between the parts, you're usually good. Now the cooler has several of these mounting holes. I'm probably going to use these 2 here. But as I mentioned, I can pretty much put this anywhere I want on this piece. I'm just going to put a second one over here. And I'm going to try to place the fastener again away from that power steering line. So let's cut another one of these. Then we'll drill some holes and we'll mount it. And I kind of lucked out because there's already a hole down in this lower part where I positioned this one. I don't have to worry about drilling a hole down through here for the lower mount, but I think you see the vision now. The only thing I need to do now is drill holes and install fasteners. This piece up here does come off. There's 2 fasteners underneath here. You might be able to see them in there, 2 10mm there and on this side. And I'm going to remove it to do my drilling. I'm going to leave it on here for now so that I can locate everything. But for drilling, I'm going to do that. Here's one more important thing. I could use bolts for this, but here's something important. You don't want to run them through this way so that they're sticking out and facing the condenser. You want to put them in this way so that if anything happens and, well, this won't get shoved into the condenser and cause an issue. To further add protection instead of using bolts like that, I'm going to use these screws with these rounded heads, which will have an even lower profile on the condenser side of all of this. As far as what happens down here coming up, I don't care, but I am going to run the fasteners up through like this to hold them in place. To try to be consistent in where I install these, I'm marking them L and R for left and right. I'm drilling 2 holes in each bracket, one in the middle of this and one in the middle up here to make my attachments. I'll usually start with a smaller size bit and then do a larger one. I think the final size for the fasteners I'm using would be this 1/4 inch. Just knocking off any burrs that get left by the drilling. I'm going to put this one closer up toward the top. And I can just eyeball these. Now I need to position things so that I know where to drill holes on the vehicle. Now this left one, I'm going to utilize this hole here so I don't have to do any drilling there. I'm just going to have to drill over here and then 2 holes up in this bracket. So I'm going to position everything, get everything where I want it, and I'm actually going to mark where I want to drill the holes for the cooler in the brackets as well, so I can get those holes drilled and done and out of the way too. This metal is soft, so it's got a little bendability. I'm going to try to make it as exact as I can, but I wouldn't sweat it too much if you're using this type of material. I could have done another L bracket up here so my fasteners would go up like this, but nah, yeah. Now we just need to take it apart, drill some holes. Perfect. So I have this crazy idea. I'm using these screw heads, which it's going to be hard to get a screwdriver down in there, but I do have a socket that has a Phillips head on it. But I actually think what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up and put that in and tack it, both of these. So they'll act as studs. So all I'll have to worry about is the nut on the other side. So serviceability in the future will be a bit easier because, well, all I have to do is remove the nuts. I won't have to worry about fiddling with these. First step for that is to clean this area a little bit. And also one over here or someplace so that I have a good place to attach it around. This is just a couple of tacks. Nothing major. And that leaves me 2 nice studs that I can easily just run a nut down onto. We're going to take it one step further. We're going to let this cool a little bit, and I'm just going to hit it with just a touch of paint, keep it from rusting. A few more holes to drill. Let's go test fit everything. A little bit of black paint on these before installation so I can put this in and leave it in. I almost forgot that guy. All better. That stables up that thing nice too. That is a transmission cooler installed and looking nice. like really nice. Now, I'm gonna remove it, but I'm gonna leave the cooler attached. Then I'm gonna take it over and I'm gonna tack these screws into place, and that way it will go on like the rest of it. Let that cool down, put some paint on it. Before I paint this, I want to check one last thing, which is pretty important, and that's what the clearance is like. It's pretty close up the top. Nothing to worry about though. Everything down here is excellent, and I love, 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 love where everything is positioned. I think that turned out great. I've done two things before I'm going to paint these. You probably see that I've masked off the threads. I don't want to get paint on the threads and make it difficult to install those nuts. They go on so easy now. And I've also scribed. You might be able to see an L and an R, because obviously the marker ones are going to go away. But I do know that the right side is, this hole is a bit higher, so I know that. The work on the transmission cooler is complete. The painting is done. It's been installed. It's very firm. I also reattached the power steering cooler. I used lock washers when I installed all of the fasteners to hopefully keep things from working their way loose. But there's more than enough clearance in here. I'm not worried about either the power steering cooler or the transmission cooler coming into contact at all. The only thing left now is to route the hoses. Now, the inlet should be at the top. This is the same way the radiator works. Heat rises, so you put the hot stuff at the top, you take the cool stuff out at the bottom. And we'll work on that after the transmission is installed. Now it's time to install the transmission cooler lines. Now that the transmission is installed, this is the outlet from the transmission and this is the inlet. So I'm going to take this, the outlet, and run that into the top of the cooler, and then the line coming out of the cooler at the bottom is going to go into this side. I have, well, what came with the cooler was some 11/32 hose. I have also some 11/32 hose here. I can link this down in the description for you, but the part number is right here. I'm actually going to run the lower one first because it's, I think, going to be easier to get to. But I'm going to spray the inside of this hose with a little bit of silicone spray so that it goes on a little bit easier. So much easier. Now I want to give it some slack because the engine's going to move, stuff is going to move. So we don't want it too tight, but we don't want it too loose either. And I'm going to try to make it so that where it lands puts it in between this space here, but not touching anything because that can cause chafing. That looks like an ideal length. That looks and feels kind of awesome. Looks like I might just have the perfect length of hose that they provided me with. I'll take it. I should probably check my battery tray real quick. It doesn't look like it'll interfere with anything at all. Like they gave me the perfect amount. And that's all I had left over. I think that turned out awesome. Awesome with an exception. This is sitting too far away from the radiator. It should be about an inch away. That way it'll get airflow from the fan. It'll be fine while I'm driving down the road, but when I'm sitting in traffic, it's really not going to get a whole lot of airflow because of the cooling fan here. Something really important to note here. Now, I seem to have gotten these, well, in a really good place, and I'm not too worried about them chafing, hitting other components. This one may be a little bit on the side of the radiator. I might want to do something about this. What I've done in the past is I've taken another piece of hose, similar to what I just threw away, cut it down the middle and put it around the outside and zip tie it to increase the thickness of the hose and give it a little bit of a buffer. So if you have a place like this where you're concerned about it making contact, just take a piece of hose, cut it lengthwise, wrap it around it, take a couple of zip tie it where you want it, where it's going to make contact with stuff, and that'll keep it from damaging the hose. The keen-eyed viewer will probably see the difference, and that is I moved the transmission cooler. I had this idea last night and I came in this morning and implemented it. It took a little bit of doing to do this, but for those of you that don't remember, the transmission cooler used to be on this side of the brackets. I have since dismounted it and mounted it on the back side of the bracket. This way it's closer to the condenser. And the reason I did this is when the cooling fan turns on, the closer you are to the component behind it, the more chance it has for airflow going through it, which is going to give you the cooling that you need. Now, the way it was before, it was spaced out a little bit too much and it probably wasn't going to get much airflow from the cooling fan while sitting in traffic. Driving down the highway would have been just fine, but sitting in traffic is when temps might start to creep up. Anyway, with this configuration, I have less concern about that. Now, I did have to do a couple of things. You might remember that I tack welded those fasteners onto these brackets. I had to grind those fasteners off, well, grind the welds off and remove the fasteners so I could put these in. I also had to modify this upper bracket. I had to cut out a piece in order to accommodate the thickness of the cooler, which I did, and everything, well, everything came out fine. In fact, I'm very happy with this. Oh, one more thing I had to do. I had to move the power steering cooler out a little bit to accommodate this. I accomplished this. Here's a fun fact. These are the nuts that are left over from the stabilizer links for this vehicle. So I just took 2 of those and a longer bolt to basically space out this bracket and leave this power steering cooler far enough out to where it had enough clearance in front of this cooler to where nothing's going to interfere. Anyway, I'm much happier with this configuration, and I know it's going to be more efficient while I'm sitting in traffic. Once your new automatic transmission cooler is installed, you are going to have to add more transmission fluid. The addition of the cooler plus the lines going to it, well, that's going to all need to fill up with fluid, and therefore you're going to need to make up for that. So make sure that you check the fluid level, and what I would recommend is that you get it where you think it's good, drive it for like a day or so and keep checking it. I'd keep checking it daily until you've got it exactly where you want it and you make sure that it's consistent. Once you've done that, you should be good. And just keep in mind that next time you go to change your transmission fluid, that you may need to have additional fluid because of the cooler. Also, you might consider draining that cooler so you get even more fluid out of the system that you can renew. Well, that was a lot of fun, right? And I have, well, zero concerns about towing with this Pilot, which another thing you should consider if you're going to be towing with your vehicle is its towing capacity. Now, you can increase that capacity a little bit by adding a transmission cooler, but you really don't want to exceed the towing ability of your vehicle. Doing that can be very dangerous. So make sure you do your homework and your research before you get started on a project like this. I hope this video has been a part of it, and I hope it was helpful to you. If you have questions about parts, tools, or anything like that, I'm going to put links in the description to all that stuff, including additional videos and additional information. If you have any questions that weren't covered in this video, I ask that you head to EricTheCarGuy.com, which will also be linked in the description. I want to thank you very much for watching today. Remember, I post videos on Fridays, so be sure to stop back and see me then. Also, be sure to hit notifications after you subscribe so you know when I'm posting these new videos. Thank you very much for watching today. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.